Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea. This week's episode of the Jams and Tea podcast is brought to you by Audible. Use discount code JAMS for 50% off your first month.
Or just go read my audiobook for free, you cheap motherfucker. Anyway, Record Club this week, we have my recommended record, which is Zeal and Ardor, their sophomore effort.
And I need to make it clear that discount code will not work. Don't do it.
No, that was absolutely fake. Unless Audible wants to, wink.
You know what? Just cut that. Just cut that out.
This is terrible. This is a terrible segment.
I have the record right here. It's somebody might have meant to see my vinyl. I
can't see it.
No. Here, this is a brighter shade.
Turn on the lights, Jake.
Turn on the bright lights.
That is his lights.
Yeah.
That is all the lights he has.
Oh. It's a purple vinyl. It's like
depressed.
The color of jam. Get it? Okay, but
no,
this record was fucking grape jam, you motherfuckers. It does have fruit on it though, just because it's in the title. But this record was released in 2018. It is the follow-up to their debut project, which they just sort of like put up on Bandcamp. And the story behind Zeal and Ardor is a curious one, just because this project spawned from a dare that I believe came from either Reddit or 4chan. Of the lead musician here was just like, name any two genres of music and I will combine them and make a record out of it. And somebody said black metal and soul, and he was like, done. And then they made their first record, which is, I don't remember the name of it, but I have it right here. Which is a notably more grimy record. It's Devil is Fine is what it's called. It's a very short project, 9 songs, 25 minutes, but it encompasses a lot of sounds, mainly that of soul, specifically more like slave spirituals, combined with a traditional black metal sound and interwoven with a sort of electronic element that they've introduced here. That they basically build upon every sound in the next album. I would highly recommend listening to the first project just because it's interesting to see where it came from, and it's short. It has some really good cuts on it. That said, they released this, which was decently successful. Fantano covered this and gave it a very positive score, and some people checked it out, myself included. And it's a testament to how good 2018 was. This was not my album of the year, because it was for a very long time. And I would say this record is very likely my favorite black metal adjacent album ever. Not my favorite straight up black metal record. That would probably go to A Walk in the Dark by Abigail Williams, but this is a curious little combination, and I recommended it just because it is such an unusual twist of genres that I think works so weirdly complementary well. And I have heard this record, God, so many fucking times. I spun this. It's a black metal album, and I spun this while helping my mother teach preschool at a camp. So wow. That was fun. So they had no idea. But I wanted to see how everyone reacted to it, just because it's sort of gotten lost in the wayside. I don't really hear many people talk about it, but people who enjoyed stuff like Algiers, specifically The Underside of Power, kind of took to this particular sound. It's not that far away, so I wanted to recommend it to share it with everyone. I know Tyler, you had heard it, and I think Morgan heard at least some of it before this.
Some of it,
probably in my car.
Yeah.
And just Saoirse and August, just because, of course. So, yeah, I will go into my deeper thoughts later, I suppose. I don't, have an entire screed about it. It's a pretty immediate record, and I can identify all the things that I love about it quite easily just because I've listened to it so much. But I am very eager to hear what everybody else thinks, because I know what I think.
Ooh, well, I might go first if that's all right.
Yeah, as this person with the second most experience with it.
Yeah, because I listened to this for the first time, I think in January, on your recommendation, and I really liked it. And No drama here. I still really like it. But I want to start off with just go with me here for a minute because this is going to sound a bit weird. Imagine Dragons, of all things, were mentioned in our discussion of the new Biffy Clyro record on our main episode. Yeah. And also, I've seen on the internet that comparison be made for parts of this record too. Bear with me.
And I can see why, but I still disagree.
No, I'm not saying I agree. I'm just pointing it out.
You can see why?
I can see why on certain tracks, like Gravedigger's Chant, for example. But that is a comparison that kind of falls flat when you take into account the broad array of sounds that frontman Manuel, I'm going to brutalize this name, Manuel Gagnon. I'm so sorry if Manuel is listening. But it's the broad array of sounds that frontman Manuel plays with here. Jake's already beat me to this, but a more apt comparison would be the booming gospel-infused post-punk of Algiers. And obviously, as Jake has said, fans of their stellar 2017 effort, The Underside of Power, will find a lot to enjoy here.
Great record.
Primarily, though, the big way in which this differs is the incorporation of black metal aesthetics, which are selective and not consistent across the record, which will no doubt irritate purists if purists come across this for whatever
black metal
reason.
Purists, most insufferable people in music.
But black metal purists are one step above neo-Nazis, and that's only because of the giant overlap between the two anyway.
Yeah, the incorporation of black metal
make music like Varg, sorry.
The incorporation of black metal aesthetics is selective and not consistent, but serve as a reminder that Manuel is exploring a broad palette here. Also, another thing that the Imagine Dragons comparisons miss is that band borrows from a tradition of exclusively black blues music from the 19th and 20th centuries in service of homogenized, marketable, bloodless pop. And that's, I think, a weird, obvious point of influence for them that is strangely never discussed. But anyway.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I didn't ever really think about that.
Here, Zeal and Ardor are repurposing the blues tradition in much the same way, but to make a similarly more accessible but distinctly meaningful statement. This is a concept record that explores America's horrific history of slavery and racist violence, filtering much of the blues that is rooted in black culture through a distinctly more modern and more often than not white-dominated musical subculture, that being black metal. And what results is a subversive, genre-bending and layered record. And anyone who doubts Manuel's black metal credentials in any way, or his commitment to that sound when he chooses to utilize it, need only listen to a track like We Can't Be Found, which will put any doubts to rest. And anyway, at this point, genre fusions like this are far more interesting, in my opinion, than purist genre fear anyway.
Absolutely.
And that's apart from this, the culture of fans. I'm just talking about the music itself. I find these kinds of fusions to be a lot more interesting at the current juncture in music. And I think these kinds of fusions are, in many ways, maybe not the only way, but probably one of the only ways that a genre like black metal can progress, I think, in the future. Certainly that the only way that they can expect to grow their audience. And the potential influence of records like this and The Underside of Power excites me a lot. The unrelenting, overwhelming dread of the title track is another disarming standout. And the record incorporates interludes that have electronic elements and add more layers to the mix without ever oversaturating it with too many disconnected ideas. But basically, I don't have much more to say than this, other than the fact that this is a great album. It's a consistently thrilling album. It throws surprises at you, but at the same time, it's all very much of a consistent and cohesive whole. It's fantastic, and I'm glad that we're discussing it.
That was beautifully put, Tyler. I agree with everything.
And I do too.
Showing up, just coming back to be like, yep, that's what yep, mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
what I said.
I'm sad that August wasn't here to hear the first two words of my review be Imagine Dragons.
That's true. That is
I will
true.
watch it back.
I did
Anyway.
not expect that to be the comparison made. I never would have guessed.
I was more trying to highlight the way in which that band versus this band utilize a particular kind of sense of aesthetics that are rooted in a particular history and culture in different ways. Anyway, someone else now, please.
Well,
I mean, no, go on, Morgan. You go.
oh, okay. Yeah, I won't bury the lead. This shit rules.
Yeah, I was a little worried with you, just a tiny itty bitty bit.
Well, fuck you.
Hey, happy to be fucked. What?
Same.
Yeah. This was an album that Jake had been talking about since it came out, pretty much. And I hadn't listened to it until it was recommended now, naturally, because, it sounded like something that would give me some sort of joy. And so, of course, I avoided it like the plague. Yeah, that's just a very elaborate way of saying that sometimes I have trouble getting into things unless I found them on my own, which is stupid, and I hate it, and I want to stop because it's
I think we
annoying.
all suffer from that too. I think that's just how we are.
Because usually when someone recommends you something, that typically means it's pretty fucking great. And this is absolutely the case for Zeal and Ardor Stranger Fruit. The idea of a black metal and soul fusion either sounds revelatory or like the greatest, biggest, silliest gimmick in all of music. And thankfully, this lands firmly on the revelatory side. This is a record that is at once furious and gorgeous. It's like thunderous, but it never stops being catchy as hell. It's just like the hooks are everywhere on this thing, since it borrows so liberally from blues and soul music of the times it's representing. But then it just comes in with the fucking riffs and tears your world apart with some dope-ass guitar shit. Yeah, I don't have much to say about this negatively. It's really good. Good album. Metal.
I like the metal sounds. They're good. They make me do the serotonin.
Those metal sounds go ting-tang and I like it.
What he said.
I really love this record, except for those tinny synths.
The sheer level of murderous rage in Tyler's eyes was truly special there.
It was like he channeled the anger on Fire of Motion into a stare. Whew!
If looks could kill, I mean, damn.
We would all be dead. So Saoirse and August, you two were two people I pretty much had I know Tyler liked it.
You already know what I think. I've told you.
But the audience doesn't. But Saoirse, you are typically not geared toward specifically anyway. This is not exactly your cup of tea. So
I have talked
curious.
Twice on this podcast about black metal records I've liked.
Well, yeah, it's just a niche that I don't you can like parts of a niche. It's just not something that I would be like, oh, wow, Saoirse listened to this on her own and just came around and was just like, hey, this is a thing.
That's fair. My interactions with black metal have been the music of Mayhem, have been the music of Death Haven. Yeah, Death Haven. Yeah, and the music of Liturgy. And I have been degrees of love to like on all of it. Guess where Mayhem rank?
Those are all three drastically different bands.
Yeah.
And Liturgy, in a funny way, is the most apt comparison you put there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I loved the Death Haven. I thought Mayhem were mid, even though they are very important in the genre. And I enjoyed Liturgy a lot.
Mayhem have an album. Just the one.
Yeah, what happened to those Mayhem fellas?
No idea.
Funny story, actually.
Someone's trying to make a movie about that.
I would really actually like someone else to try again and do it better.
Specifically.
Please.
Yes, actually.
Can we get a reset here?
Yep. Anyway, I enjoyed Lords of Chaos, but I understand why someone else would want a different version of that story. Anyway,
it's basically that I want the same version of that story, but done better.
That's okay. Okay, that's fair. Anyway, like I just as a diversion, I love the fact that that movie is a dark comedy more than anything else. But anyway, I like this record quite a bit. I got less soul than blues, but I think we've touched on that. I think in 2018 there was a lot of very popular blues inflected pop music, which reached its peak with Rag and Bone Man's Human, which is a very mid song, but that's beside the point. This is like, there are moments on this record that sound like that song, but it's so much better. And then the rest of it is hardcore metal, and I love it. I think it starts with this like bluesy soul, slave spiritual intro that just builds and has this amazing climax, and from there on, you know what you're in for. I would highlight the tracks "Don't You Dare" and "Row Row," and also "You Ain't Coming Back."
Row Row goes so fucking hard.
Also built on ashes. God, just it. I know we talked about bands maybe leaning on the idea of just building and building and building a bit too much, but this record does it well.
And the hooks, Morgan said it. Them fucking hooks, man.
That's in my notes where it's like, I did not expect a blues soul inflected black metal record to be this catchy.
Roll,
and this
yeah, gonna go shapeless forms you didn't even know. It's infectious.
Yeah. And it's
monetized.
It's almost like verging on the best kind of gospel in that song at that point. But no, also You Ain't Coming Back. It's apocalyptic. It's more traditional blues. This don't tell yourself that you're safe. That's a paraphrase, but it's similar to the hook in that song that repeats and repeats and repeats, and it's just so good. I think the two electronic interludes are pointless, and I could do without them. And I think Hello, Jake.
Hello.
Wait your turn.
I know. I'm just signifying. And I do have something to say about those.
I think by the end, I felt like I would not be able to tell them apart. That might be the point, but I found them boring. And I think by the end, I felt like, it's not exactly a track that's short on. It's not exactly an album that's short on tracks. Like, it has a lot of songs, and by the end, I felt like I was experiencing more filler than killer, and what that leads me to feel like is this is feeling like a genre crossover gimmick now, which the joy of the album is that for the rest of it doesn't feel like that. The joy of the album is that it feels like those genres were always meant to be together. And by the end, when just the songwriting isn't as good and the album's a bit too long, it's a bit bagging. I've listened to a lot of songs. It's just like, if you'd have stopped now instead of 10 minutes from now, I would love this record a lot more. Those are my very basic thoughts. I think I've covered my general opinion and why this album is worth recommending.
Yeah. Now, the true wild card. The chaotic neutral.
I want to know where you had your hand up on my electronic.
Oh, well, no, I just had something to say about them for when I talk about the album.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, Zeal and Ardor, yeah. So, I don't know if we've made a point of this yet, but stop me if we have about just the heavy implications of this album's title, Stranger Fruit.
Yes, please do.
Because Stranger Fruit And I feel this is what will immediately unlock a lot of the album, even if you haven't heard it. The phrase strange fruit comes from about the 1930s, and it referred to the way that, and I'm just going to be upfront about this, the way that African Americans looked when they were hung from trees. From a distance, it looked like a tree was growing some form of strange fruit.
Is memorialized by Billie Holiday, of course.
Yeah, Billie Holiday's strange
interior
fruit.
of the album is this to accentuate the point.
And the cover of the live album is like that with white and red.
So yeah, we're already off to a very heavy start in terms of just what this album is about thematically, and something that's been brought up as a point on, and I'm going to call back to the Proto-Martyr song I Am You Now, which is a song that embodies the idea on social media of one kind of taking over and co-opting like an oppressed group's identity. And like, I am you now, as Tyler had so delicately put it in his review. And when you're making an album like this, you run the risk of, intentionally or not, that being your implication. And I can fortunately say this album does absolutely not feel like it is trying to like speak for African Americans or like pretend like it has some sort of deeper cultural understanding of that experience. This album's chief priority to me is to just kick ass. Because my God, is this just one of the most fun things to listen to. I mean, I feel I'm at a bit of a distance with this record in a sense where I feel a lot of what it is doing is a bit intentionally subversive of a lot of black metal kind of tropes and things held in high regard, but I don't think that's really a big problem for me because regardless of maybe some of that subversion flying over my head, it's still a fun record to listen to. It's still wildly entertaining and catchy. And if that subversion was the only thing to it, it would suck. But that's far from the only thing to it, because we've got to talk about the sound on this album, which is just monstrous. For example, the drums on Gravedigger's Chant just have a thunderous presence to them. They sound like a marching army. The percussion in general is just fantastic on this album. The hand claps on the song Servant add a distinct degree of momentum to that song. And I feel that's also just a general positive of this album as a whole across it. It's just got such a great sense of momentum. It can just move. And the fusion of Southern blues I really love, especially on the song Don't You Dare, which I think is I think that's the album's debatably best song in terms of blending these two styles so seamlessly. And there's just a lot of obvious purpose to why this album is about what it is. Like as Jake mentioned, this kind of random assignment of genres, it doesn't feel like something where where Zeal and Ardor are using these genres as like window dressing just to make whatever dumb music. Like the music they are making is purposeful to the fusion of these two styles. It is there's like, if this wasn't a blues black metal soul album and it was just like a metal album or a soul album, you would lose a lot of the impact it has. I just can really appreciate what it does on an academic level, and I think it also works quite well on just a visceral level. It's really fun. However, I did think the interludes for me sounded a bit stock and generic, like all three of them just I could have done without them, just thrown them right out the door on an already fairly lengthy album in terms of track list. And I guess my other issue is that I wish some songs had a bit more development to them, particularly that kind of Coagula, thank you. That Solve Coagula kind of duo felt a bit half-baked to me. But ultimately, that kind of that stuff is just made up for tenfold by the urgency of songs that are more developed, like Row Row. And yeah, it's pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Well, that is awesome. I was a bit nervous recommending this album just because of how weird and different it is, but I am genuinely shocked that this seems to be pretty overwhelmingly positive. It just, I am glad that my appreciation can finally truly be shared. And if I can talk about the record a little bit, I will say, yeah. August put a lot of those points, like Tyler and August, like in tandem. Both of them said
there are many times that I've wanted to beat Tyler's ass, and none of them have come close to that moment just then.
I'm sorry.
Sounded like my English teacher.
Can I go to the toilet? I don't know. Can you?
I will shit on your desk, lady.
Please talk, Jake.
Yeah. You and August both put it like brilliantly, like the context under which this record works on sort of a more academic level, which I think is interesting just because, you know, black metal, not really a genre that is notorious for its layeredness. So I think sort of bringing that to the table is something special that Zeal and Ardor do. And I love how sort of the record sort of lures you into a false sense of security when it starts, because I feel Intro and Gravedigger's Chant, while definitely present with both metal and with blues and soul, it doesn't really like kick into high gear until you get to Servants. Like Intro and Gravedigger's Chant sort of set up the most basic elements of this album's sonic palette. And like a lot of my favorite albums, it has a sort of narrative to it. Not a story being told, but the sort of an eclipsing of an event. As you listen to this record, you can sort of hear the story developing of a group of slaves who are not using, who like, I think the subversion on this particular aspect is very important because it subverts not only black metal, but also blues and soul. Black metal, for reasons August already said, just because it takes, like, it's a lot more varied and it's not about being punishing, it's about being catchy and anthemic to a level. But on the blues side of thing, I think that using things like slave spirituals and blues, songs that are notoriously dominated by the black community because they used these songs, at least when the era from which this is specifically driving them from, as sort of pleas to God, as to sort of, you know, liberate them, to save them, to keep them safe. And I love the inherent darkness of the idea of saying, well, what if these people became so just like jaded with the idea of God that they turned to Satan instead, and after God didn't save them, they raised demons from hell to kill their white oppressors, which is the most black metal shit I can possibly think of. That is the hardest, coolest fucking thing I've ever heard. If that was a movie, I'd be all over that shit. And that's sort of where I think Servants comes into play. Servants is like a rallying call of sort of like, you know, this is what we're doing. This is like what we're about to conjure. And then immediately goes into Don't You Dare and Fire of Motion. Like Don't You Dare serves as a really great rebuttal of like, you know, there's no turning back from once we cross this line, we are, we're fucking there. And I love the start of Don't You Dare sort of has those bluesy guitar sort of chords, the bang, down, down, down. It's so good. And then you immediately go into Fire of Motion, which is, it sounds like you are being burned alive. It sounds like you are taking someone to the stake. And the one of the best aspects of this, I love the vocal performances that are on the bluesy side because it perfectly captures that genre, but the fucking black metal screams on this album are so good. Like, they vary from being like howling, almost like just declarations of war, to being inhuman shrieks that are scarcely heard in even a genre as extreme as black metal. You have these just absolutely, like, when the throttling guitars and the absolutely, as August mentioned, booming percussion. The drums on this album sound louder than anything I have ever heard in my life. And then you go into The Hermit immediately after. And I do entirely understand being sort of, off-put or just not into the electronic interludes. But at least with The Hermit specifically, I feel this is a reprieve, especially after a track that is so intense like Fire of Motion, but it's sort of a movement. I view this album as happening in basically 3 different suites, and this is sort of the end of that. You have Fire of Motion, which is this destructive, like, cleansing fire, and then you have The Hermit, which to me always sounded like the fire is gone, and it is the fog and smoke of a burned down forest or plantation that are, the group of people in this album's story are standing amidst and are sort of experiencing the euphoria of this destruction inherent with their freedom, which I think is good, that the electronic is sort of so divorced from the other parts of the album just because it makes that freedom feel all the more refreshing. And then you go straight into Row Row, which it picks up the momentum again just immediately. And you go from Row Row to Ship on Fire. And Ship on Fire is probably my favorite song on the album just because that shit goes so fucking hard. And also, with Ship on Fire and Servant specifically, I love how the structure of these songs is so fully formed. I love how with each repetition of the verses, the delivery of, like, each time he delivers the lines, there is something different about his intonation to make it different, especially on Servants. It's very, very noticeable. But Ship on Fire just sort of also, alluding to the fact, slaves coming from across the ocean and, just fucking the reoccurring theme of fire. And then you have Waste, which is like almost nu metal in its just crazy sensibilities of how fucking hard it goes and the screaming. And throughout a couple of tracks here, you hear voice clips sampled, like songs about like them being, things being ideal human sacrifices, or a priest saying the title of Fire of Motion. And, they sound like, old plantation owners. They sound like lawyers. They sound like, old white men who, would probably be the victims of the narrative at this point. And then you have You Ain't Coming Back, which is this like Lovecraftian darkness of a song that is just, it's channeled so well of just like, this is what we're doing. This is where it's sort of a companion piece in a way to Don't You Dare, I think. And then we have The Fool again, which I think bookends the movement very well again, just because of how intense it starts and sort of just lulls you in there. And then we have We Can't Be Found, which is maybe the bluesiest track. And then Stranger Fruit, which those fucking ominous pianos in the very beginning where it's just like boom, 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 boom. It's so fucking menacing. And then you go into Solve, which I think is this sort of group chant. You sort of get the feeling that they've come together and they're like rising something from the ashes, something worse, something bigger to end all of it. And Coagula is sort of the continued extended chanting. And I fucking love the ending, which is Built on Ashes, which is one of the darkest pitch black songs I have ever heard that would give any straight black metal material a run for its money in terms of how absolutely bleak and dark and sludgy and just absolutely like terrifying and even kind of sad that it is. And it ends on that unexpectedly somber note. And it's just this beautiful cinematic just movement, this symphony, and it concludes with such finality, and it makes this so much fun to revisit. I feel like every song is perfectly sequenced. I feel like the album itself has a beautiful flow to it, and it does all of this subversion, but as August said, that subversion is not necessary to understanding or enjoying this album. It is simply something that makes it better, because this is still so immediate, and it's so immediate with genres that traditionally aren't always immediate. And because of that, I think it is a commendable achievement in genre crossover, but just in and of itself, it is a remarkably fantastic detour that would rank among albums like Algiers, The Underside of Power, as being something that has risen from this decade in music that I feel like could only come from this decade in music, in that it is both immediate, and that it is political, and that it is dense, and that it's campy, and that it's weird and dark. And I love it. It is everything about the mystique of modern music, of the fact that you can just see this like rated on Rate Your Music or whatever. You see this album come out and you listen to it and it's like, holy shit, this is something I've never fucking heard before. And it just happened. It just materialized out of fucking nowhere. And I love it. It's been like, I love how taken advantage of this concept it is. Like, some bands are formed through like something that they genuinely like love. There's like a core to their sound that they're all passionate about. And they can't even make records that are so thoroughly exploratory of what this is and does. So, yeah, I like it. It's okay.
What?
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Hey, who dared say such things?
Don't you dare look away, boy.
Jake dared
Okay.
say such things.
Very
I would
good.
not say such things if I were you.
Okay.
Sorry, I had to Chris Sarandon.
Fantastic
Yeah.
little discussion.
I am
great
so
album.
happy. I'm very pleased with all this.
Yeah, super fun. Okay, shall we move into our favorite tracks and ratings then?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
why not?
Okay. Jake, you can go first.
Picking 3 tracks, it's difficult. But if I had to do it, I'd say Servants, I'd say Ship on Fire, and I want to put so many other songs here, but I really love the closer. I'll have to go with Built on Ashes. And least favorite, no, I don't want to, and you can't make me. So, suck it. And this is an emphatic 10 out of 10 from me.
All right. Very nice.
Yeah, boy.
August.
All right. So I'm going to say my favorite tracks are Don't You Dare, Row, Row, and Built on Ashes. My least favorite will probably be Coagula, and I'd say this is a solid 7.5 out of 10. I will love to see how this ages for me with more time and more kind of experience into black metal.
I would too.
Yeah. My 3 favorite tracks are We Can't Be Found, Fire of Motion, and Row Row. My least favorites, I do kind of have to agree with Saoirse that the electronic interludes don't really add a whole lot for me personally. So my least favorite is The Fool, and this is getting an emphatic 9 out of 10 from me.
All right.
So that's me then.
Very nice.
My wife.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just in case you weren't sure.
High five.
Okay, carry on.
Okay, so
Saoirse.
my favorite 3 tracks were probably Servants, Row Row, and let's go Built on Ashes. And my least favourite was The Fool. And I'm giving this record an 8 out of 10.
I'm giving this record 8 out of 10. That was that delivery.
My 3 favorite
This
tracks.
is the best record.
Burger King
best
foot
records.
lettuce.
Anyway,
Tyler. Was that what Jake was going for? No?
No.
Damn. That's what I heard. Tyler.
My 3 favorite tracks are Don't You Dare, You Ain't Coming Back, and We Can't Be Found. My least favorite track is Solve. And I'll give this a very strong 8.5.
Yeah.
Very good. Very
Good album.
Happy. I have this album memorized in my head the way like Morgan does like Ride the Lightning. Like it's just on loop. The hooks are always in my head.
I wonder when we'll get a chance to talk about that album.
Yeah, it's not going to be anytime soon, is it?
When will we talk about such an album?
All I will say to our viewers is keep your fucking eyes peeled, because that will be on your dashboard thing.
Good Queens of the Stone Age song.
The Stone Age would be a great B-sides episode.
Oh, fuck, yeah.
Anyway, as discussed in our main episode for this week, our next week's Record Club review is actually going to be...
If you will let me do the introduction to this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was gonna cue you in, dude. It's fine.
Oh, you were?
Go.
August is excited. Just let him be
No,
excited.
go for
I'm
it. No,
excited.
it's fine. Go for it.
I said, everybody shut up.
All right. Next week, we are talking about not 1, but 2 albums. First off, the Rolling Stones, their iconic 18-track album, Exile on Main Street. Jumping ahead of me. Exile on Main Street. Jumped ahead of myself there.
It's perfect.
So confident and almost said the wrong album.
Exile in shit. Damn it.
And also, we will be talking about Liz Phair's Exile in Guyville. These 2 records have a significant amount of history, mainly that Guyville is a response album to Main Street. So on top of listening to those albums, however many times you will, I will recommend that at least one time you listen to them in a track-by-track response order. So you start with the first song on the Rolling Stones album, and the Liz Phair album, and so on.
I am gonna try that actually. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I
Because
will
I've
do
heard
that.
both
I've
these
done it
albums before, but I never
I have
made
done
this
that
connection.
myself.
I've heard neither, so I'm interested. I've never even heard a Rolling Stones album in full, or a Liz Phair album for that matter.
Well, this is the only one you'll need to hear of hers.
Yeah, that's...
That's not necessarily true. I haven't heard another
No.
one, but she does have other records that are beloved. She has some that aren't,
yeah.
but she has plenty that are.
No, that is fair.
No, my favorite is
That is
self-titled.
fair. Like the singer.
Thank you for
Oh, yeah.
listening to this episode of our album club
Contemplating.
segment on the Jabs and Tea podcast. Please join us next week. Please. We need the attention.
But it really
Inspiration.
doesn't suit my style.
All right.
Please, they won't feed me if you don't join us
So,
next week.
Tyler, will you lead us out of this episode?
Rock over London. Rock on Chicago. Google. Don't be evil.